we're just so happy that all of you are joining us. And what we will do is hear from each member of the team. So we're going to start with Laura Beth Dean, who is the author. And then we'll hear from Nancy Tystad Koupal, the editor. And then we'll hear from Angela Corbo Gier, who is the creative designer. And then finally from Jeanne Bowman, the illustrator. And I will say more in detail about each of them as we get to their turn. And at the end, we will have time for questions. Because we have a lot of people, we're anticipating a lot of people to join us on this Zoom event. I'm going to ask that if you have questions that you type them into the chat, and then I will convey them to whichever person that you want to field that question, or maybe you want to have the whole entire panel take on that question. All right, so let's start with Laura Beth Dean, who is the author of Georgia Jipp, Blizzard Pilot. And she's going to give us, if you've been thinking, who is Georgia Jipp? We're going to find out. And also a lot of kind of things that we think you all might want to know, like how did Laura Dean find this story, and what motivated her to tell it to us. And she's also the author of Sweet Potato Moon, which she's going to tell you a little bit more about at the end of her segment. So without further ado, here's Laura Beth Dean.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deidre, and for each of you for this wonderful opportunity. I hope that you're all snug with a warm cup of coffee or cocoa or tea. The timing of this event is perfect because it coincides with the 75-year anniversary of when Georgia Jipp flew as a Blizzard pilot from Phillips, South Dakota. Deidre asked me to talk about how I discovered Georgia Jipp and a little bit about the research process, and give a little timeline of Georgia Jipp so you would get to know her a bit. Just to tell you a tiny bit to start with about the writing process, it was a prayerful, fun, and completely unexpected 7-year journey, graced with generous help from people around the country and with dogged determination to write a picture book about such a deserving hero. I'm profoundly grateful for this tremendous privilege and for all the support that I've received. Even as recently as this year, Susan Sanders, who is a National Weather Service meteorologist out of Rapid City, she contacted Deidre and with some new information and a wonderful photo of Georgia Jipp, which she remembered seeing in the employee lounge there. So how was a nurse from Virginia the unlikely discoverer of Georgia Jipp? Well, it was through a heroic lamb from South Dakota. So I discovered her through a roundabout way through my South Dakota relatives who owned a sheep ranch in Perkins County. And in May 1948, their little lamb named Susie was born on the prairie. Then Susie's mother developed mastitis and wasn't able to nurse her for a while. So my great aunt Nettie bottle fed her to health, and they developed a very special bond. And that special bond proved instrumental in saving their entire flock of 500 sheep, because November 18, 1948, an unexpected blizzard was coming. And so my great uncle Art and Aunt Nettie had to move the sheep that night from the bedding ground to the sheep shelters near their home. So because it was foggy, the sheep were confused and kept running, in circles. But then Nettie had the idea of stepping out into the headlights of the truck and calling Susie's name. And because they had such a special relationship, Susie came to Nettie. And so Nettie and Susie led the whole flock, with Uncle Art driving the truck with the headlights shining the path home. And no sooner had they gotten to their sheep sheds than the blizzard arrived. So that was my connection, because I decided to write Susie's story. And so I began researching the blizzards of 1948 and 1949. And I ordered this book called Blizzard 1949. And as it turned out, it was the only one of 3 books in existence that had any information on Georgia Jipp. So in that book, I learned that 22-year-old Georgia Jipp and her father were the only two pilots in Phillip at that time when the blizzards began, and they had a hangar at the Phillip airport. So according to the South Dakota Office of Emergency Management, beginning January 2 that year, 1949, blizzard conditions raged for weeks, and Georgia and her father flew endless hours helping ranchers and farmers who were running out of food and fuel. Radio stations transferred emergency calls to Georgia and other flyers, and people would stamp signals in the snow so that Georgia could see what they needed. And she also fitted her Aeronca Champ with skis so that she could land on packed snow to help them. So I was immediately captivated by this young woman who was a pilot, and who was a pilot at that time, and that she would risk her life and sacrifice her comfort for all those weeks. So I had to find out more about her. So I scoured the internet, and only mostly to come up with dead ends. So performing original research was challenging, and I had no experience in that. I wrote emails and I made phone calls. Nobody I talked to had ever heard of Georgia Jipp. So I was incredulous that there was so little information about her. Disappointed and discouraged, I put Georgia Jipp on the back burner, but I was determined that if I found enough information about her, that I would write a children's picture book. 2 years later, at a luncheon with friends here in Southwest Virginia, I learned that one of my friend's daughters was a librarian in Spearfish, and my wheels were turning. I thought maybe now finally something could come through. So I got her contact information. Her name is Amy Sundberg, and she too was initially unable to find information, but she asked her co-worker, Eric Sundberg, who's a research librarian there, Eric Broussard, and he emailed me a few weeks later with information about Georgia Jipp. So I was ecstatic, and I thought, well, if that information is available to Eric, then I would be able to find it too. So I learned that Georgia started volunteering by flying for the American Red Cross after South Dakota had been declared a disaster. So I called the American Red Cross in the Dakotas. They had no record of her, but they sent me to the Boston archives, who sent me to the Washington, D.C. archives, and that led to the discovery of the March 1949 issue of the Red Cross Courier, which exclusively featured the blizzard emergency. And let's see, Georgia Jipp was on the cover. So that was the first picture that I ever found of Georgia Jipp. So, and then here is the picture without the Courier copy. And Georgia was also inside, and this is her receiving instructions from Richard Hansen, who was the general field representative for the American Red Cross in South Dakota. Then I found American History and Bell Laboratories online, and there was this picture of her. Next, I discovered newspapers.com, and through newspapers.com, I gained access to newspaper articles from the 1900s, and I was so excited to find short articles about Georgia that were featured nationwide, along with that first picture you saw, which is the Associated Press picture of her. And it was so fun to learn through one of the articles that Georgia and her husband, Richard, got married in an airplane when it circled over the town of Phillip. That's how much she loved flying. So I spent hours in the library, in the research room, on the computer. I scoured ancestry.com trying to locate relatives of Georgia Jipp. It appeared that she didn't have any children. And it was through searching the 1930 and 1940 United States federal census in South Dakota that I learned that she was born on a sheep ranch, which I thought was really cool, in Lead, and that her father was a pilot. And I located the U.S. Department of Justice list of inward bound passengers that shows Georgia and Richard sailing from San Francisco to Honolulu, Hawaii in 1943. Then somehow belatedly, I thought of emailing the city of Philip to ask for information, and I was delighted a day later to receive a phone call from Brittany Smith, the city administrator. She had never heard of Georgia Jipp before receiving my email, but she went looking in their Hockin County history book, and she found that Georgia Jipp had flown the blizzard missions, and she sent me the copies, she scanned the pictures from that book and sent them to me. So I also researched ski flying so that I could gain understanding of the special expertise that is required of ski plane pilots. My brother-in-law, Mark Navratil, who is a pilot, and his dad, Mike, who is also a pilot, were both very familiar with the two planes that Georgia Jipp flew, the Aeronca Champ and the Piper Cub. They gave me expert advice about the challenges that 5'3" tall Georgia may have had in reaching the rudder pedals and brakes and needing cushions in order to have forward visibility. Another important aspect of my research was exploring the broader impact of these storms, such as President Truman's emergency order of Operation Snowbound, and how the Army, Air Force, Navy, National Guard, American Red Cross, etc., and many others worked together to help people and sheep and cattle. And when I had gathered all the information that I could find about Georgia and the blizzards, I carefully considered the theme and the title, and I worked for many months transforming the information into what I considered a fun and inspirational manuscript. I also had joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and I attended a few of their conferences up in the DC area. And I participated in some of their critique groups because I didn't have a lot of experience in writing, and as well as local critique groups. So in closing, I'd like to give you a little timeline of Georgia Jipp. On May 4, 1926, Georgia Marie Hoyt is born in Lead, South Dakota, to Murren and Frances Hoyt. At age 17, Georgia begins flight training in Spearfish and completes her training at the Spartan School of Aeronautics in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the age of 19. She works as flight instructor and charter pilot for her father's Hoyt Flying Service in Philip, then as operator of Philip Flying Service. October 18, she marries Richard Jipp, a Civil Aviation Authority operator in Philip. And then January 2 to 5, 1949, a blizzard devastates the upper Great Plains. Georgia, her father, and a lot of local pilots flew mercy missions. The National Guard brought in snowplows and M29 cargo carriers to rescue people and to provide supplies. January 11, another major blizzard struck. The Air Force launched Operation Haylift using C-47 and C-48 cargo planes to drop tons of supplies for families and bales of hay. And then 2 to 3 more blizzards, major blizzards, followed in January, along with other storms. The storm area included 13 states. On January 24, President Truman ordered Operation Snowbound. That's when the military came in, and the Navy created a radio communications network. On March 30, winter dealt its final blow with another storm. The winter of 1948 to 1949 ranks amongst the harshest on record. The disaster area is 193,000 square miles, and the affected population estimated is 1.2 million. 1950, Georgia flies stunts at the annual Flying Fun Festival air show in Philip, and she also demonstrated how not to fly at low altitude. Georgia attends meteorology schools in Tucson, Arizona, and Oregon State University. And then I learned this because of Susan's kind phone call. This is Georgia working at the National Weather Service in Rapid City from 1946 to 1948. And I want to thank Scott Rudge, who scanned that at good quality for me, and give the credit to the National Weather Service, Rapid City. Georgia works 33 years for the Weather Bureau. And on April 6, 1987, she died in Sheridan, Wyoming at the age of 60 and was buried in Riverton, Wyoming. So that closes my part about Georgia Jipp. Since Deidre mentioned about the book, this is the sweet potato moon that takes place in South Korea, based on my mother-in-law's childhood there in the 1930s, illustrated by Nadia Ilchuk, who's from Ukraine. And the graphic designer is Dawn Dooms, who did an excellent job. So thank you so very much.
All right. So thanks, Laura. What a great introduction to Georgia Jipp. Our book focuses on the blizzard pilot part, but we always, in our biographical children's picture books, have a timeline in the back. And so if you didn't catch all that, when the book is available for purchase, you can get the full timeline. All right. So what we really wanted to do with having the entire creative team give you some idea of what it takes to put a book together is really to show you that it takes a village to do one of these things. And Laura was just telling you a little bit about her sweet potato moon and the village that it took for that book. So we're going to turn to Nancy Koupal, who is the founder of the South Dakota Historical Society Press, and now in its 26th year. And when she retired, then I became the director, and I would not ever say replace Nancy, because Nancy is irreplaceable. And her love for this process of creating children's books has carried into her retirement. She's not actually retired, only in name only, I think. So she really loves this project and wanted to continue working on it. And is going to tell us more about it. Then we get a manuscript from an author, and you heard about what it takes to put that together, and then what happens next. And that's the editor's job. So Nancy.
Yes.
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Very well.
All right. Well, what Laura didn't tell you is that she distilled this manuscript down to 971 words when she submitted it in 2021. And 971 words is an excellent picture book size. That's the size you want. So she had done a marvelous job of getting it distilled. She then had to choose who she was going to submit it to publish. And that's where I and the South Dakota Historical Society Press come in. So we received this manuscript. We looked at it. It appealed to me immediately because it was about West River farmers, ranchers who had planes, which when I was a young woman growing up in South Dakota, I had two uncles who lived out in the Kyle and Martin area, and they each had a Piper Cub. So I knew all about was fascinated with how they landed on the prairie, took off on the prairie, kept those planes on the prairie. And this immediately rang true to me because of my background as well. But the questions we had to ask ourselves was, okay, does this fit into the mission of we're the South Dakota Historical Society Press? So what does that mean? It means that history is our mission, and the telling of history is our mission. So this was based on historical documentation, and it was also something that in judging and looking at it, we could see that it was going to be able to be completely nonfiction. In other words, this story, the way that Laura framed it, meant that the story was it was imagined in many ways, but it didn't put thoughts into her head. It didn't put words into her mouth. It did a little bit, and we asked Laura to remove that because that kept it from moving into the area of historical fiction, which we really didn't want to. We didn't really want to go there. We were looking at this historical series of biographies, which we started with the book on Bob Marshall, the Defender of the Wilderness, which came out about a year ago now, I guess. And so that was the first in the series. We could see there's Jeannie's got a copy of it, I can see. And that was, we wanted to keep that nonfiction series going. And this was perfect. The question, Laura's manuscript was perfect. The question from my point of view, as I looked at it, I could see some improvements that we could help with in the editing. So Laura and I started this dialogue about, are children famished, or are they merely hungry? And how do you keep it at a level for children, the writing for children? They don't have to be exhausted. They can just be tired. Things of that sort. And then the other thing that I looked at or was conscious of is that the illustrator also has to have room to make the book his or her book. And sometimes Laura's writing was so graphic in some ways that it just pushed out the illustrator. So I asked her to consider leaving room for the illustrator to tell her part of the story. And that all went very well. We plumped up the after matter, or the back matter, we call it, the historical part of the story. And as Laura is indicating, she's still finding things out. She's still working on her timeline. And that's all going forward right now as we speak. So once we determined that the story fits our mission, and there were just some beautiful images in this story, like Laura says, next to those big planes from the Air Force and the Army and the Navy and what have you, the little Piper Cub of Georgia Jipp looked like a hummingbird. And I thought, oh God, that's a beautiful image. And I think we know just the person that can help us take it to the next stage. And the next stage is once the editing is done, once Laura has put her final flourishes on the manuscript, then we turn it over. At that point, actually, I start breaking it, as editor, start breaking it into a page by page layout. At 971 words, the book is perfect for a 24-page or 32. Okay, Angela, you'll have to fill me in on this one. Is this 24 or 32 pages? I've forgotten. But in any case, Angela then, who is our art designer, or the person who's actually going to shape this book into the whole that it will become, she starts manipulating the text. And once she's manipulated the text, while she's doing that, Deidre and I are trying to determine who is going to illustrate this book. And people don't really understand this, but for the most part, illustrators are chosen by the publisher, not by the author. So, you don't have to worry if you're writing a book, a picture book, the publisher the publisher also has an image. Just like I said, I love that picture of the little hummingbird plane next to those big freight planes. So they have a vision too, and so they start looking at their pool of illustrators. They go. If we went to the Society of Children's Society of Children's Book Writers, and oh man, I'm SCBWI, we call it. Squibby is what we always called it, and started looking at portfolios. And this is where we found Jeanne Bowman, and we found her back 2 books prior with Charlie Russell and the Gnomes and Bob Marshall. There she goes. That's Charlie Russell. And that's Jeannie did a wonderful job with that book. And then once we started the biography series, she was a natural to keep it going. So once we got the text all broken up and sort of figured out how many flats there are, how many spreads, I think they're called, then the job passes through Angela. Do you have anything you want to say at this point, Angela?
No, I think you're nailing it. You don't need me.
Okay. I always need you. So, but anyhow, at this point, enter our illustrator. She's got the edited copy. We don't ever give her raw copy because that can be too confusing. So we have to have edited copy that is pretty much nailed down. That doesn't mean things won't change a little bit, because as she's doing her illustrating, she's going to make some of the words obsolete. And so we haven't quite done that yet with this one. We haven't made our final pass to look at the pictures and the words to make sure they don't become redundant. But so enter Jeannie, illustrator, who is going to begin her own tale of research. Jeanne Bowman is our illustrator.
So I'm gonna go back to Angela for just a moment, even though she said she's happy not shocked, but I want you all to hear from her about what a book designer does. So thank you so much, Nancy, for showing us how everyone's connected through the editor or through the publisher, kind of orchestrates. It's like conducting a symphony. I chose that word on purpose. So, Angela, first of all, tell us what a book designer is and does.
Okay, but I always think that an editor, who I think editors are magic. I always think of an editor like a midwife, is more than a conductor, because it's like you have the author's words and the illustrator's images, and there's this idea, and then they're the ones that sort of make it happen and come to be. I think editors are amazing. So thank you, Nancy.
Okay, so I need to introduce Angela, as I just realized I didn't do that. So Angela Corbo Gier came to South Dakota in 2005 after having quite a great experience in New York as a book designer. She was on staff for Harper's, Penguin, and Macmillan, and Disney. She worked for Disney from 1996 to 2005, and since she moved to Sioux Falls, has been doing freelance and doing great work for us. So I was trying to recount with her, since we do one children's picture book a year. So I think going back to, I want to say like 2015, maybe earlier.
Yeah, I think
Something
earlier.
like that. Yes. I grabbed a couple of the things that she's designed for us. So Muskrat and Skunk. It's one of my favorites.
That's a fun one.
You can really see the ingenuity of the designer in that one. And then probably the project that kept her up way too many hours. Our first graphic novel style. It's not a novel, but graphic style, American Ace, which is Joe Foss fighter pilot, that came out in the spring of 22, and much sweat and tears and blood from Angela and Nancy on this one. It turned out great. She's also, when she was in New York, worked on designing books for Maurice Sendak, called Brenda Brenda Bear. I hope I remember that name right. And then her favorite is called Mary's Monster by Lita Judge.
Yeah.
We all have favorite things to work on. So Angela's going to tell us a little bit about what a book designer is, and then how the designer is able to kind of understand the book as a whole, and then translate that into how it comes out, using all of our senses, really.
All right. Well, I'm going to be brief because the illustrator and the editor like really kind of say what I do as they're going, because I'm just kind of the glue. I'm the person that puts it in place. And the Muskrat and Skunk book was an interesting book because that's in 2 languages. That's in Lakota and English. So as a designer in that case, Nancy we did a different font, I think, for the Lakota. So that's what a designer would do. It's like, so in English, I set the font in one way, and then in the Lakota part, I set the font I sent the text in a different font to separate them. So you didn't think, as a reader, when you're reading it, you don't feel like, you don't have to read everything. You're reading your English or you're reading your Lakota. You're not, you can mix, to separate them. But then as a designer, we're just nerdy people with fonts. We just are constantly looking at fonts and feel like fonts have personalities, and we want the personality of the font to match the personality of Laura's story and Jeannie's illustrations, and the grade or the age of the book, like who's reading the book. So we really care about fonts. So I'm just going to keep using Muskrat and Skunk, if that's okay, just for a nerdy example of. So, I'll pick 2 different fonts, but they have to be of equal importance. Like one can't, like the Lakota couldn't be like, sub to the English and vice versa. They were both important, and it was almost like having, anyway. And so that's what a designer would do. We would try to keep everything balanced. There's when Nancy gives me the book and gives me the text that's pretty close to final, like she said, I kind of figure out where I want to put it on the page to like begin with. When I think about someone sitting down and reading a book with a child, and they're on your lap or they're next to you, and where do you want their eye to go? Where do you want to start? And I read the text out loud when I'm laying things out, because I think about reading it to someone, and it's like you have to breathe with it, right? So you want to read it and then turn a page, or read, or sometimes Jeannie will know, like I'll put a block of text up at the top, even though Nancy will say this is all for page 14. She'll give me the leeway that it'll be like, well, someone on 14, but then the last bit ended on 15 to make it move, and it works with Jeannie's illustrations. So so my job is to make sure Jeannie knows how much space she has. I'm pointing to Jeannie because she's there on my screen.
There on mine too.
Where Jeannie is. So my job is just to let Jeannie know how much real estate she has. And depending on the age and the kind of book, the fonts are going to be different sizes. And so she knows how much room she has. And then Jeannie just goes crazy and does amazing things, and tells a beautiful story with her sketches. And I can't wait until she tells you like what she does research wise. It's amazing. How many times have I said amazing? Is anyone keeping track? So what else do you want to hear from me, Deidre?
I think the thing that I always think about you and your work with us is the textile sense. Like you are so good about textures, and I don't always think about that. Like, but whether the page is coded or uncoded and how it feels as you're turning it is all part of the experience of reading the book.
Right. And I think that's because you came in on like when we were doing the biography, or what was the what was the book, Nancy,
It was
about?
Bob Marshall.
No, the other one, the Harvest, a place or time for
Yeah,
harvest.
Place for Harvest. Place for Harvest. Yeah.
Right. And so you came in at a very specific time of us working together where I just want uncoded picture books because they have a sense of importance. We get so many marketing materials in the mail all the time. We get catalogs that are beautiful and glossy and magazines, and they're beautiful. But a picture book, like, a bunch of us have shelves behind us in our pictures. Books, they last for a long time. I recycle my magazines if, I try to. Sometimes I can't, but books have a weight to them, and sometimes I just think picture books, some picture books work better on uncoated paper. It just feels real, and I like the way it smells.
See, it is a sensory experience.
Yeah. But I just think about like the very first time, like I always remember like my first book would have been Where the Wild Things Are, which is, just beautiful. And I think that was on uncoated paper. I probably have it right behind me. But in any case, yeah, the paper matters to me. This is all Maury's, but I can't find it. Okay.
All right, I'm going to move us on to Jeanne Bowman so we
Yes,
have
good.
time, because she's got all kinds of visuals and I want to make sure that she has time to talk us through them all. Thank you so much, Angela, for kind of giving us a sense of how you as designer are putting it all together. And so that always think about that creative, like the spacing of things, and it's a whole. Okay, so Jeanne Bowman this is her third book with the South Dakota Historical Society Press. And you've seen us flashing books to you. This is her first one with us, Charlie Russell and the Gnomes of Bullhead Lodge, which we published in the 2021. And it's a delightful story, beautifully, whimsically illustrated, very fun. And then last summer, Bob Marshall, we're all showing you Bob Marshall. We released Bob Marshall, Defender of the Wilderness. And so we've just had such a delightful time working with Jeanne, and she's also doing a book for us next year, which is on Badger Clark, Poetry Wrangler. Hopefully I remember that title correctly. So Jeanne works from Montana, and it's just really delightful. So I'm going to let her take over.
Okay, I have a lot to show everybody, so I'm going to just jump right into it and share my screen. So, oops, there's my email. Don't read any of my emails. Okay, let me know if you guys can see this. Oops, let me make it the right size. Okay. Everybody can see the screen, I'm hoping?
Yes.
Okay, because I know sometimes there can be a little bit of a lag. So, okay. So I'm going to show you a slideshow, and then I'm also going to show you a time lapse of one of the paintings being made, because this book I did digitally. I made it look like watercolor, but it's actually painted on the computer. The first book I did with the press was actually watercolor on paper. And then Bob Marshall was my first time ever doing anything digitally. And then the process was so easy that we just decided to do this one easy, but we wanted to go back to the watercolor look. So this book is kind of a blend of both of them. So I'm going to walk you through the whole process. So first of all, I hope from our talk, you can kind of get a sense that there's like a back and forth throughout the whole process. Like it's not one person has it and then like that's it. It's more like I see it as kind of like the zigzag bouncy thing. So when the story comes to me, I start with research first. And then after the research phase, then there's character sketches, because I like to start with the character because that's how I kind of get into the story. I'm one of those people that's obsessed with characters. And when I was a little kid, my sibling and I, we would play this game called like Two Baby Puppies, and we would spend like 3 or 4 hours like writing down what kind of puppies we would be and like what we looked like. And then it'd be time to actually play the game, and we'd be like, I'm bored. Let's start over again. We start this completely different game with different characters. And like, that was all we were interested in were the characters. So for me, that's how I get into the stories with the characters. And then so once I get the sketches done, I pass them back to Nancy and Angela, and they give me their opinions on it, and we do some revisions. And then I go through and do the rough story sketches, and then again I hand it back to them, and then we do revisions. And so it's this whole thing over and over again. It's just this zigzag bouncing back and forth through all the steps. So first I'll talk about the research. I actually do a lot of research. I'm kind of a type A sort of person. So I'm one of those people that has to have like every little detail correct. Like for Charlie Russell, for instance, I spent time reading about what kind of pencils they would use during his time period. And I went through this whole history of pencils, you know, something you wouldn't think a person would really pay attention to, but that's in historical books, you have to have all those details correct. So this is just a list of the kind of research that I do. I asked myself, what did the time period look like? What were the important events or movements that were shaping life at the time? What do the characters look like? And there's a lot of other nuanced questions that come in, but those are kind of the main ones. And for this book, I've listed some of my sources. There's a lot more that I forgot to list on here, but of course, the press has a lot of really great resources, and I use the online digital archive of photos to see photos of Philip back in the day. I also looked at PDFs about the blizzard, and then I use ancestry.com to find census information, draft cards, marriage certificates, obituaries, and stuff, the same that Laura also used. Same with the newspapers.com. I found lots of pages. Here's an example. That picture that Laura had earlier has got Georgia up there at the top, and then some of the other pictures of the time. And then my first step after kind of doing a quick cursory Google search, and when I found that not a lot of stuff came up, because I was kind of spoiled with Bob Marshall. There was a lot of information on Bob Marshall. They have whole family archives of family photos and stuff. And so when I went to go look at Georgia, I'm like, oh, it'll be easy. And I looked and went, you know, typed it in, and it was like crickets. There was not anything in the internet about Georgia. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do this the hard way. So the first thing I decided to do was just call Philip. And I started by calling the library, and Bailey Brock, the librarian there, she was extremely helpful, and she turned me on to a bunch of other people that would help me. So the next person I called was Mona Van Lint, who is the Philip Finance, in the Philip Finance office in Philip. And her hobby is actually looking up historical stuff like this and making kind of archives of the town's history. So I hit the jackpot pretty much right away with her. So she sent me to John Becker, the aeronautics engineer at the South Dakota Department of Transportation, and he helped me figure out some of the planes that her father would have flown, because at that time I was like, well, I know he's on a farm. They have a sheep farm, and he's a pilot, but what kind of plane? Because, you know, there's millions of different planes, and especially since it was like, you know, right at the end of the one war, and then we're going into the next war, the world wars. So it was like, well, what kind of plane would be over here at this time, and what would it have been used for? And I was thinking, well, after doing some research, it was probably a plane that had been turned into maybe a crop duster or something like that. But he was the one who helped me kind of narrow down what kind of planes I might be, as well as the planes that she might have gotten married in later on. And then Mona also reached out to Butch Amsden. He was actually, this was like the big, like, woohoo. He was the one whose father actually bought the airport from Georgia's father. And so he had photographs of the actual airport of the time. So that was like, woohoo. I didn't have to make that up. I didn't, because I was always like trying to like Google Maps, like look at the, try and get like a really close view of like what the airport looks like now. But of course, you know, it's all different. But, and then also Mr. and Mrs. Lee Vaughn. Lee Vaughn is a Civil Air Patrol person, and they both had information for me as well. And then I also have to send a shout out to my uncle Al Kuykendall, and then my friend Dale Galland. They're both RC plane folks, and they fly scale models, RC scale models of the kind of planes that we're talking about. So I had, I'll show you in a minute, but I had a plethora of really amazing actual model planes that I could move around and, you know, get the right angles to draw these pictures with. So I was like, this book's perfect. So I also went to YouTube videos. I watched people flying the planes. I watched people, you know, they nowadays we're so lucky because people will fly drones around their planes as they're flying or attach cameras to their planes as they're flying. So you can get views that wouldn't have been able, you know, I would have had to imagine and really, really work hard, but it was easy for me. I also looked at PBS documentaries, old advertisements for clothing and machines and just all kinds of stuff, old advertisements, sewing patterns for clothes. I also use 3D models. When I couldn't find a, you know, like if my uncle didn't have a certain model of RC plane, I looked at a 3D model, and then just different Google searches. And then the 3 books that Laura actually mentioned in the back matter. So I had to look at those as well. So I'm just going to run you through some of the photos as we go through this. So the first 4 here are those photos from Butch Amsden of the airport that Georgia, she actually lived and worked at this airport, according to him. He said that in this little house in the back is where they lived. And then these are the hangars where the planes, you could kind of see, it's hard to tell, but there's a plane back there. And then down below, there's the hotel. I found a postcard from that time period with the Seneschal Motel or hotel. Then the matchbook card. And then, of course, I used Google Maps to see kind of what it looked like today and kind of get a good sense of the color as well. So I'm really lucky to be doing this at this time period. These are a couple more photos of the blizzard, just to kind of give you a sense of the scale of snow that people were dealing with. I mean, houses were completely buried, cars were buried. It was, you know, people could barely walk through it. And then here's some more, you know, people would make tunnels through it, all kinds of stuff. It was just, everything was buried. So these are some of the different photos I kind of looked at to paint. And then the 3D models, the ads, for instance, for airplanes. I was looking at the kind of advertisements they had back in the day. I looked at, I don't know what these things are called, but they're like almost like architectural drawings of a plane. I can't remember the right word, but, and then of course, you know, stills from different YouTube videos. I just took screenshots of these to see how it all worked. And then here's my Uncle Al. In his workshop with all of his planes. He's showing me one of his smaller planes there. The one he's pointing to is his Piper Cub, but you can see that the planes he flies are quite large. They're pretty big, and they're gas and electric. So they're pretty amazing. And he puts them all together himself. So it's pretty cool. And then, of course, these are the photos that I got for Georgia. And these were the ones that I based all of her character drawings on, just these 3 drawings here. So these were my very first sketches of Georgia, just kind of trying to test it out, see if I could get kind of a good feel for her, kind of do a turnaround to see if I could keep her consistent, play around, you know, with her different ages. So these were the first sketches. And then these were the first tests. I did one here in digital, and then the ones on the bottom line are all the watercolor on paper that I tried out. And I was trying to do something a little bit different stylistically with this red line. I thought that might be kind of fun to do. And then I've also got some examples here of the clothing that I would, you know, some of the photos I used to look at like clothing for her other outfit. And then, so this was the first painting I sent to Nancy and Angela of Georgia. And then here on the side, I've got some illustrations by Herbert Paus, who was illustrating the popular science magazines in the 1930s. And you can definitely see a huge influence on me there. I always like to kind of pull back to my illustration heroes and influences. And there's always something in each book I'm working on that kind of like puts a nod to them, just because I'm like, I'm so awed by them that I'm like, I gotta do something. But so this was the first test we kind of did. And then we decided that maybe she needed to look a little bit younger than the original sketches we had. So I went back to the drawing board and I started by first just tracing over the photos, these two photos, and then trying to see, you know, how she might have looked if she wasn't like fully smiling, if her mouth was closed. And then I was trying to make her look a little bit more picture booky and less realistic. Something that would make it a little easier to paint page to page and kind of give it that playful feel. So these were the next round, the full figure, and then of course her heads, which I use over and over again. And then from there, I move on to the sketches. The one on the left are the very, very first sketches I do. Actually, that's a lie. These are the sketches that I first start actually working out. The first sketches I do for myself are, they're not readable. Nobody knows what they are after a year or so. I don't even know what they are. They're just scribbles. So this is the less scribbly scribbles on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, this is the storyboard as it becomes a little bit more refined. And this is the one that I actually will send back to Nancy and Angela to get their opinions on it. And as you can see, if you look at, say, this one here, I don't know if you can see my little highlighter, but this one here is the one, stop. Oh no. Okay, so that's the one where she's getting married in the plane. And you can kind of see how these things change throughout the process. So it started out with a full spread, and then I thought, well, I was looking at the text again. I thought, well, maybe a double page spread. So I broke it half into a photograph, like a spread of like a whole family gathered together at the wedding, listening to the wedding on the radio. And then I had the plane on the second page. But then I sent it to Nancy and Angela, and they said, what if we combined this and made it more like a scrapbook? And I said, oh, that's a great idea. So this is like the revised version of that sketch. And then it goes into the lines. So this is right before I paint it. This is the line work that I drew on the computer. And then here's another example of where things change. So this was kind of like the first idea of this spread here. This page on the right was the one that I started. I was going to have these two parents in the foreground saying goodbye to their kid as Georgia flies it to the hospital. And then after I had drawn it, I decided, you know, that it just doesn't have the emotional impact I'm looking for. And there's not enough Georgia. Like this book was starting to feel very remote to me. It felt like it was all planes, and not enough Georgia. And I thought, okay, we got to have more Georgia in here. So I decided to redo the composition again. And then I sent it to Nancy and Angela and crossed my fingers and hoped that they liked it. Which is what I've done a lot throughout this process. Is I'll do something and then I second guess myself, and then I'm like, okay, well, wait, I'm going to do something else, and then I'm going to send it and hope they like it. So, and thankfully they always do. So they're awesome. This is another example. This was a page near the end that I had drawn, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it was too similar to the one that I had drawn in Bob Marshall. So then I decided to take it back to the drawing board and adjust it. Yeah, there. Yeah, Angela's got. Let me go back one. You can kind of see it's sort of the same, a little bit the same compositionally. I had a vignette in the foreground and then the main figure. And I thought I liked that, but at the same time, I just felt like it needed its own jazz. So I brought this one back, and I also wanted to show more of what she was really doing with the Mercy missions, which is, you know, bringing things to people, taking people to the hospital, making sure that people had supplies. So
the book just for this spread, by the book. When wait till you see the finished color, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
So much fun.
Yep. So speaking of that, so now I'm going to head into this time lapse, and you can watch and let me know if it started for everybody. Okay, so you can watch. This is a little bit of a longer video. I'll try and walk you through it as we go, but so this is me, you know, drawing these. So this is the first spread that I just showed you of this one. So I was going to go ahead and draw it, make sure I had it all down before I did the alternate version, you know, just to have like a fallback in case Nancy and Angela did not like it. I was like, well, I'll bring this to them and then I'll bring the other one. So this is me drawing this on the computer in Adobe Fresco. And thankfully, the cool thing about Adobe Fresco is that it records all of your brush strokes. So I didn't have to do anything special to record this. It does it automatically when you draw in it. And then this is me where I am, you know, working on that spread that you just saw with all the groceries all around. This is how I drew on top of the original one and tried to find a composition that I liked a little bit better. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's extremely scribbly, as you can see. It's very, very rough in the beginning. I don't really know what I'm doing when I first start a drawing. And for me, drawing is a series of constant refinements. It's like kind of trying to polish a turd, trying to polish a diamond, you know? I start out extremely rough and change my mind about 10 million times. And eventually something starts to come out of it. You can even see here, I had changed my mind several times. There was a sketch I had done earlier that I had thrown out at some point. And I thought, well, actually, that's not a bad sketch. So then I was trying to play with it and see if maybe I wanted it to be, you know, on this page, or if I wanted to have it be another single page spread. And then of course I went back to this double page spread. And it's all just, it's me not quite knowing. And then all those little flashy things that show up, those are all my references that I am importing and then putting on here. This video, I think it took me 4 days to paint it and probably another 2 days to draw it. So that is all that time condensed into an 8-minute, I think it's about 8 minutes, 8-minute video. So this is like 5 bazillion times sped up. So no one alive can draw this quickly.
What are you, Jeannie, what are you drawing with? You're drawing with what? Physically, what's it?
So there will actually be a part in this video when it comes to the color portion where you will see me actually using the tool. It's a stylus. It's this little guy here with my little handy egg on the top. It's just a pen that comes with my computer. And I'm using a Microsoft Surface computer to draw on, so I can draw directly onto the screen. But when you work in this program, they have all kinds of different brushes that you can use. And they have this really great default pencil that looks like an actual, you know, Blackwing pencil, which is what I use most of the time when I'm drawing. That's kind of how it turned out with this. And we'll be getting to the color portion very shortly. It just, like I said, a lot of drawing. And, you know, as I work on this, I pull in photos to take reference from these, and I'm trying to match what I'm seeing to what I'm trying to draw. And I'm still messing with the background. The background was really hard for me to find something that I liked. So it's a lot of back and forth.
And you have to keep her consistent throughout the book.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
said,
that's the,
like she always has to look the same unless she's aging.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's not so easy.
Yeah, I learned the secret not but a few years ago of how to keep characters consistent. And it has to do with those character designs in the beginning where I had the face kind of turning around. That's something in animation they call a turnaround, where you take a character and then you move them so you get an all angles view of them. And that helps keep things consistent. So this is where I'm starting to paint the final image. I start by outlining each of these things and putting them on their own separate layers so that I can use them, what's called a clipping mask, where you can paint inside of a shape without it going out of the border. That way you don't have to like be really careful and make sure you go right up to the line and stuff. And it just saves time in the long run. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. And then I am using watercolor brushes, the Kyle Webster watercolor brushes that you can get from Adobe to make it look like watercolor. And I'm also importing textures. I actually, for this book, I did a bunch of hand painted textures on watercolor paper. I would wet the paper and then I would throw salt on the paper so it would come up with these little blooms. So I would lay those over the illustrations and so that it would have kind of like in the snow, you can see sort of that rough texture. That's an actual watercolor painting, just overlaid onto the work. So, and the neat thing about those watercolor brushes is that they have this property called multiply. And here you go. You can see me painting right onto the screen here with my little handy dandy stylus. But yeah, so watercolor brushes, you can go over, and every time you go over, it darkens it, which is kind of like watercolor. I've been painting in watercolor since I was like 16 years old, and these brushes are pretty good match for water. I mean, there's still a bit of, you know, things where you're like picky, you're like, it's not quite watercolor, but you know, I think it's pretty good. I liked it. So. And I hope this doesn't give anybody seasickness or anything, but you can kind of see the interface that I'm using. On the left-hand side is my color and my brushes, and then on the right-hand side are the layers and the opacity of the layers. So you can kind of see how I'm building the image and sampling colors from the character sheet that I painted. So that's kind of how this came to be. Oh, you're muted, Angela.
I said you don't have to keep changing your water over and over and over again.
Yeah, that is the one good thing about doing this digitally is there's not a lot of cleanup. I mean, behind me, you'll see there's like 10 million palettes or something where I'm kind of a lazy watercolorist where I don't clean my palettes that often. It's waste paint, I think. So I tend to just leave it. But with this, you know, you can mix your colors however you want to, and you don't have to worry about that.
Jeannie, we have a couple of questions while you're
I'd
doing
love to
this.
hear them.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw them all out at the same time. So what kind of input did you get from Laura as the author about illustrations? Like, did she have some things in mind? And how many days / hours did you say it took you to do this drawing montage?
So with Laura, this is the first time actually. Just last week we met for the first time, you know, virtually. But so the only input I get for these illustrations are from Nancy and Angela. We're all done. So let me stop there, go back to that. So let me which one is it? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so I only hear from Nancy and Angela, and they're both awesome in guiding me on what to do with each page. You know, Nancy's got all kinds of really great insights. Like, for instance, like there's a page where there are pillows that were important to the story. And my first inclination was to sort of let that be in the words. But Nancy wanted to stress to me that that's actually extremely important to have the pillows in there because it shows, you know, more about the character. So it's getting notes from like that from her and from Angela that help me mold these illustrations into what they become. And, you know, the whole time I'm working with them, and then Angela all the time is giving me suggestions like the scrapbook image with the wedding, and then also for like the single page illustrations, she mentioned we should do a border, which I didn't show you any here, but it's got a really cool frosted look, kind of like a you know, a window pane in winter and stuff. So I'm getting notes from them the entire time. So it's like the three of us that are working on this together. And then time-wise, I think it took me, like I said, I think it 2 days, and I work about 8 to 10 hours a day on illustration. So it was about 2 days for the drawing portion. I think it was a while ago, and then 4 days of painting. So it was some hours were spent on this for sure.
All right, there's also a question about how the title page is composed, and that might be a question more for Angela and Nancy, all of you actually. How do you
Well, we're not there yet.
Not-
That's
yes.
interesting. I was working on that today, and Jeannie and Nancy, I have another idea about the title page, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. So it's the way I work as a designer is not much different than what Jeannie's doing, where I'm like putting things down, and this is good, and that's like, no. You go back and forth, and you have to step away and come back again. So in this case, because we're trying to, I don't know, would you say loosely, Nancy, Jeannie, make this series of biographies? I want to have the same feel as what's going on with Bob Marshall, just layout wise, not color wise and everything. So we have Bob Marshall to look at for our title page.
Yeah.
I would also add that Laura, the author, sees the final drawings and she gives her input at that point. And that I share with you, Jean, with the illustrator and with Angela, but more with the illustrator to say, she says this doesn't work, or she's, she had concerns about the planes based on some things. So it's she will also see once we get all the words and all the pictures not completely finalized, but she'll see this all again soon, actually.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we have come actually past end of our time. That means we were having a really good time and learning a lot. So we're 10 minutes past. So I'm going to wrap this all up, and I hope you all will come back sometime late spring when Jeannie's done with this process. We will meet again